For some reason, our culture has created this idea of scarcity. You can't convince me that the birds are gonna have enough food and I'm not. Nature is incredibly abundant. You have any idea how many seeds are gonna come from this one seed? Insane. My name's Josh Sundberg and I'm a modern day homesteader. What people mean by a modern homesteader essentially is self-sufficiency. We're calling this the berry bed, goji berry, the blackberries, but what I'm pointing out right now is the arugula. My first garden bed was 2 feet by 6 inches. It was this little thing I put together and watched miracles happen. I've not taken any farmal gardening schooling or classes, but what's better is just going out and observing and doing. Some natural breakdown process in varying stages. What little microorganisms are working on this, things start coming alive. Roly-poly's going crazy right there. And then all this right here, that's worm castings. Just put the elements in place and let the systems do what they're supposed to do.
In this place, the land speaks a language all its own, a language of balance, resilience, and cooperation. Here, nature isn't something to conquer, but a partner to learn from. By combining ancient wisdom and modern technology, this homestead has found a way to thrive by working with the environment rather than against it. From water systems to gardens that mirror forests, every inch of this land is a testament to the power of listening to the earth. This is more than just sustainable living, it's a return to nature's blueprint, where every solution begins with what nature already knows.
What drew me to this property was the creek, frankly. Water is life. We looked hard for it. I looked hard. I was literally on the couch during the peak of COVID, searching Zillow, scrolling the map of the creek, and trying to find properties that had a little for sale dot. Clicking on Zillow, right, here's what I saw was the fruit trees. Like I saw a peach tree that was in veg right from the back balcony. I saw the chicken coop, I saw the greenhouse, I saw the Airbnb, or rather the guest house, and I was like, this is what I'm looking for, something that can immediately start generating income for us, something that people want to see, right? Because you have to have that, and then like knowing that I would add to it and move on from there. It was those components where it's like, here's a greenhouse, so I don't have to create very much infrastructure as far as that goes. It's maybe changing some things. The bones were here, and that's what was super important to me. That's really it, and knowing that it had the water. That's the biggest part to me is the water. In a way, I say this property was meant for us. We put all our chips in it, and so that's the thing that's a scary thing to do during such a time, and frankly, every other logical person around us was like, you guys. Death is the only thing that sustains life. Everything that we're aware of that we call nature, except for ourselves and our domestic animals, kills for living. To be a steward of nature, as people say, you've got to observe nature. To like just sit and watch what is nature doing. Nature is systems. You can't be the overseer of every system. You put one seed down, this one plant, this one seed that was one plant turned into all of these seed heads that have who knows how many countless seeds in each head that the finch will eat. And that's great. I'm like, yeah, we love feeding the birds. For me, the cool thing is I know they're gonna drop seeds, and they're not the type of birds that go to the ground to pick up seeds. Also, the ones that do are not likely to get them all. So my point, all these are volunteer sunflowers within, a couple seasons, because that whole idea of live and let live, let something do work for you. And that's my whole point, is I don't have people around here to help me. I'm one guy on just under 2 acres. I've got my family, but like, if it needs lifting or pushing or screwing or that's me. So I've got to find streamlined ways to keep my time, which is my most precious resource, is time with my family, with anything. And so to me, it's partnering with systems. And, the finch is a system, we'll call it that. We knew that the lure was the creek, right? It's kind of one of those, like, it's the bait to get people here. I've always loved Oak Creek. When I lived in Phoenix, I would come up for water day trips. We'd hit a local water hole, and Oak Creek is just absolutely one of my favorite bodies of water in Arizona. It's one of Arizona's only perennial watersheds. It's what's really cool is you can drive up to Flag and you can see where it starts, and it's not even a creek yet. You drive a mile or two down, you start to see the flow, drive a mile or two more, and you start to see more water going and white water. It's just really cool to see how this just emerges and is perpetually flowing. It's not wasteful. No one's running the water. No one forgot to turn it off. It's really mind-blowing when you think about it and the amount of life that it supports. I often see beaver and otter right here in this little section. We have fish in this creek all the time, like bass. There's carp. I mean, mostly the fish people don't want, unfortunately, but also introduced. So what are you gonna do? Soil is formed through transportation. And essentially when you do get storm runoff or when you get the rain, like this creek also deposits tons of sand, silt, and clay. That is the geometric combination of what is soil. A few weeks ago, the water came up. And so like you see this pile right here, this just kind of shoved up there like that. It looks like it drifted against these reeds. It did. The water only came up a couple feet, but came up enough to like start moving some of my little debris that I was bordering the path with and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to see it now, but it's funny because I noticed this stuff right away. This is clay. We've all seen, you know, shots of clay like this, right? It's like, if you ask anyone, hey, what kind of soil is this? Probably someone's gonna say clay, right? They see it all cracked apart. But if you look at it, it is this thin deposit. It just deposited right on top of the soil. It's like right on top of the sand or the silt or the clay or whatever was there. And next year it's gonna do it again. And next year gonna do it again. And then, so soil builds in horizons. On a non-stream bed, you're in a forest, the leaf litter, they fall, something eats it, it builds up humic soil or soil organic matter, more leaves fall. It's that constant process of building and layering that is soil formation. So my whole philosophy on how to grow is how the cottonwood grows. With that diagonal tree going up there, the big one, it was our only cottonwood until I got rid of the reed. Again, you and I are standing where there would have been reed. We could not have stood here before. It would have been absolutely impossible. But now, you look at these, I've got all these cottonwood trees growing right here. Are they all gonna make it? No, probably we'll see what winter runoff does to some of them. These are my beans. There's a lot of them all over. For whatever reason, they do really well in just this path. I don't water them. It may be a quote invasive species on the creek or whatever. It's not gonna take anything over. I keep intentionally between the paths these wild chunks of like diverse plant populations and some seeded plants that I'm, you know, let that mulch and reseed. And so, but it's important to keep these wild sections, if you will. I threw so many different seeds down there. It would be fun to actually go in there and see like what is growing that I can't see from here. But again, more clay, right? This water runs over and it just deposits layers. And stuff does get washed away too. So part of the process could be like one step forward, two steps back sometimes. Put it this way, this soil right here is vulnerable because nothing is locking it in. But any deposits that are in here are gonna be much more secure because, you know, it's like, it's a comb, frankly, right? It's gonna catch things. It's going to lock it in. The roots are locking stuff in. I'll have grass in the paths where I can just kind of weed eat and make it approachable versus having to come through and pull out plants that are like, you know, rooted in the system. Wild and approachable is like the balance we're going for here. In absence of a clearly defined goal, you become strangely loyal to daily trivia until ultimately you become enslaved by it. And I can also attest to that. When you are spinning 11 plates and making sure none of them drop, your priorities become preoccupations, and less are you doing something effectively well, and that's problematic. And so it's like clearly defined goals or daily trivia, you know, take your choice. And it's not to say you can't have multiple irons in the fire, that same analogy. It's just be careful and prioritize, because even on a property like this, right, like a burn pile, for example, this has happened to me plenty of times where I have time blocked off in my calendar to do a burn, but it's raining or it's windy. Biology's my first boss. Doesn't matter, I have to answer to it, and I always will, and I love to. But things don't always operate on a 9-to-5 schedule. If you are spinning that many plates, it can become problematic and or a blessing to where, okay, I can't burn, I know I have something else going. There's some weeds that, right, I just don't want to even chance them coming back through a compost. I don't thermophilically compost, so there's stuff that I burn, and that organic matter is gonna then get spread out on a field, and it is what it is. We try not to burn much, we try to chip what we can, but again, you have to be realistic. Like when there's so much, I mean, you look around, there's so much wood, and this is just from this year, from the trees down there. So I can only chip so much. And if I chip, now I'm using fossil fuels, right? So like there's pros and cons to every practice. And it's just like, if you can identify them, make your own decision. I'm not here to tell you what's better or worse, but I'm just saying what works for me. Releasing carbon into the atmosphere from burning, not so good, but I'm gonna plant plants to try to offset that. And I have tons of mulch that I'm putting on the ground to sequester carbon, but all we can do is try. And so here, check out this mulch though. It's funny, I like geek on mulch so hard. Before we ever moved here, it's so cool that this property reflects things that, you know, when COVID happened, like probably a lot of people, I was on the couch more hours than I wanted to be, like researching things or doing stuff. And like one of the things I was researching was like homesteading with bamboo and stuff. And somebody's position was like, every homestead should have bamboo. And like, whatever, dude, you're weird. He was saying like, it produces the most biomass. Those plants, how they stack so close together, they shoot 30 feet in the air. And when you chip them when they're fresh, it makes this really nice straw in a sense, right? So I can spread this, it's a grass on the field as a straw, right? Or wherever I need to put biomass down. When it gets to its harder, like woodier phase that it'll get to in the wintertime and you chip that, this becomes more like what you would think a traditional mulch. This will break down and become soil very quickly, right? Like it's delicate, and this is more coarse, and probably, if I had to guess, it might have some lignin component to it or whatever, but it's a more complex carbon. We can say that almost assuredly because it's just harder. It's gonna take a while for this to break down. Different microorganisms are likely to work on this than this, even like some might, you know, do both, but my point is I got two products from the same plant. Does it belong on the entire bank like that? No, this is my opinion. You know, we removed it, which again, that was a heartache in the whole process. Like there were pros and cons to that, very much. To say now that I've cataloged over 86 plants, that's amazing to me. There's a lot of edible plants down there. The wild mint is probably one of our favorite, which is just mind-blowing, the menthol that comes out of that. I guess I look around at the soil health and the diversity, maybe that's like the biggest thing in flora and fauna. It's looking at that, looking at this tree growing that was dead for even a year's time when we were here. So that eucalyptus tree was, quotes by our neighbors around us, dead when we moved here, and apparently dead for like 8 years is what we were told. And for the first year or two, we joked that it was like our cheapest farm equipment, because if you know anything about raptors, hawks, and owls, they'll sit up on dead wood because they have an unobstructed vision, right? Like they don't like dense leaves around, they can't see. So they would sit up there perched, and like, I'm like, oh, this is great. They're gonna help us with our gopher problem, etc. But then all of a sudden it started growing again. Like we had put compost over on that other side, and it's like, what is happening? That tree is very much alive. You can see the bush happening around it, right? The base of it is actually more of a bush, but this branch, I mean, that's gotta be 40 feet up, 30 feet at least right there. But we'll harvest these leaves for our poo-pourri mix. Pretty cool to see something like that that's supposedly been dead for years come back.
Nature has always been the ultimate teacher, showing us how to create harmony between the land and ourselves, from designing water systems inspired by the flow of rivers, to building structures that mimic the efficiency of beehives. Biomimicry helps us work with nature, not against it. And just like nature has so much to teach, so does today's sponsor, Skillshare, where you can learn how to bring even more innovation and sufficiency to your home. If you're inspired by nature's designs and want to incorporate these practices into your life, there's no better way to start learning than with Skillshare. Whether you're interested in composting, permaculture, or raising chickens, Skillshare offers thousands of classes taught by industry experts to guide you on your journey. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives and innovators, offering classes across fields like design, entrepreneurship, sustainability, and more. Their classes allow you to dive deeper into topics that can transform or start your homestead. With Skillshare's learning paths, you can follow a structured series of classes that build on each other, making it easier to master specific skills like sustainable farming techniques, water conservation, or even green building practices. Skillshare helps you explore practical and creative skills alike, whether it's designing efficient systems, learning about eco-friendly materials, or discovering new ways to market your products. The first 500 people to use the link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Don't wait. Start learning today and take your home to the next level.
So here's our little vineyard. We're in Arizona wine country. So this was our our project thanks to all the amazing mentors who live in the area who taught us just about this really cool plant and the fact that it can grow here in Arizona. People are always sort of shocked and surprised that Arizona makes wine, but we love wine. And so we planted some Syrah, Mourvedre, and Grenache, this GSM combo, which seems to do really well here. And they say not to baby the vines the first couple of years. So these vines are 3 years old and we've really just let them kind of fend for themselves. So they're healthy and they're happy. You know, we've gone in and out of different water, in and out of different pruning. We're enjoying just being in this space. It just feels like you're in another world, in another place. So there's some grapes on them right now, but we won't harvest and make wine for another year or two, and maybe we'll just have a lot of red wine vinegar that first year, and that's okay too. It's a learning for us. We've got 10 of each, which should yield about 150 bottles of wine, and we'd love to be able to share those with friends and family and guests who come to stay on our property. We've welcomed over 500 people.
This whole building, when we moved here, was the chicken coop. The whole thing, it's like a hotel for chickens. It was insane, like, what? But the guy we bought the place from, he was very much into upbringing poultry and meat birds. Ours are pets currently that lay eggs. We don't do meat birds yet, but we intend to at some point. But this front half is the outhouse.
This is our poopery that we make with mint, eucalyptus, variety of mulch, and this is what you use. Of course, it's a dry system. It's a dry toilet. We have a bucket, and that's where it all happens, and then you top it off with our
compost toilet. I've never been in an outhouse that smells this good, first of all, and I'm like, I mean, bring me a plate of food, I guess. It's weird, but just saying. But that's the mint from the creek. So the wild mint that we talked about and the eucalyptus, that is what we have, and it helps a system that we want.
It's a way to show just a different system. This is what a compost toilet can be. This is how easy it actually was to do. People ask a lot of questions about it, and it's fun to just engage in those conversations. It's not applicable everywhere, but it works here,
For sure.
and it's fun to show and talk about. And everyone's always surprised at how well the poopery works.
Just to show you again, like, this was here when we got here, this was here when we got here, this was here when we got here, this was in the greenhouse, and I used it as a seed table a couple of seasons. But it's about upcycling things. We don't buy everything. Like, there's a lot of stuff, even copper, wood, that we reuse. If it's usable, we use it. We're constantly upcycling. We had a metal guy that he did our fence work for us and stuff. I drew him an idea what I needed, and a couple hours later he's like, come pick it up. So, you know, we can't do everything alone. Independence, again, that idea, it's silly. It's community all the way, you know. AZ Worm Farm, Tribe Mycelium, Sam, Scott and Ashley will talk about with the chicken food. It's just weird and it's cool, but it's the community. The origin of this outhouse was for events. And same with like this kitchen. We've done really, really cool events here with awesome chefs. I think at one point we had 5 Food Network chefs on one event doing something with us, which was super, super cool. So we put together this outdoor kitchen. I mean, it's cool to see chefs setting up here doing stuff, and you got 30, 40 guests or so down there. 50 people, I think, is our max at one point. And it's just a really cool space. But that's what this was created of, again, was out of essentially a void or something that we were operating on. It's, you know, and that is creation, is ideas to matter.
The second we set foot on this property, we knew it was to be shared, and that is just a common theme that we've carried through our time here. I mean, it's in our name, it's what we do.
We wanted to get married, and like, obviously, okay, let's use an Airbnb. We don't live up here, so we had our dog, not him at the time, but it was hard to find Airbnbs, one that allowed dogs, or really even just families in general, kind of, or that support that vibe. And then 2, the event space on the creek to get married or to do something like that, to find a rehearsal dinner spot or any of that. It's just like, wow, what is up with the voids up here? Like, people come up here and there's nowhere to do that. And so that's really what it was for us, was creating an event space that we thought should exist, that we could not have ourselves. When we wanted the Airbnb, it's like, it's hard to find. And so what we've tried to create is what we wanted years ago. Like, say we're playing in the creek and we're muddy, we got our dog and he's muddy or she's muddy, and you can come and leash your dog up and rinse them off, right? Before you go in the casita. And now, so you don't have to walk on dirt. That's why we did this little path. Like, everything is from an experiential problem presented at one point. And it's like, of course the hard floors in there we can clean and mop, but people feel bad bringing their muddy dog. It's just like, people feel things. So like, let's help have better experience.
See how many eggs we get today, River.
All right, girls. For the chickens and how we are currently using and operating, it's tricky because we do give them the chicken food, you know, that we get from Scott and Ashley, which we love so much. I've had chickens for years, well over 10 years. So it's like I've seen a lot of chicken foods come down the line. I'm really happy with their product. It's great. Our birds love it. That's what's important. And we get eggs pretty consistently, even winter and summer. So it's cool. The chickens eat a lot of the green. Like what we're seeing around, it's all matted up because they were eating it and chewing it and doing what the chickens do and poop on it and whatever, but it depends on if they're out of food, like it looks like they are, and out of bedding and stuff like that. You know, every day or two, come here and I start to call them, like I whistle, like I'm... But I just pull them over to a little fresh patch. You can see they're already starting to scratch and peck at the fresh green. But I call them so I don't run them over, basically, because chickens are smart enough, but, you know, they're not dolphins.
One thing that we noticed is when they were in the coop that was here, it was huge and they like to be really close together. And so they weren't laying very much in there. These were some birds that we brought up with us when we moved here, but then we also got several from neighbors, you know, within months of moving here. And they were laying, but when we built this and moved them in here, I was nervous thinking, oh no, you know, we're taking away they need space. And of course they do, but they started laying within 48 hours. Almost every single bird was laying. So that was just a learning point of like, oh, they actually like to be sort of cuddled. They feed off of each other's hormones. There's a whole method behind it. So yeah, this can fit like up to 18 birds. And it would be fun to just have another one that we can move around and continue to work on the soil.
This is not a very high-tech feeder, but same with their water. This water, actually, I got the idea when I was working at Ryba Farms still. 3-inch PVC pipe, I believe that is. And you just put a float valve in it so that hose is on, which there's a little leak to it and that's fine, but it's actually watering. Like I said, they kick this seed around and it ends up watering and growing little patches of wheatgrass and stuff like that, like around. The chicken food will then be, you know, in the ground ready to grow for them in a green plant form. So I don't mind a little trickle. Also, we're really fortunate. Our well, our garden well, that is this water here, is 30 feet deep, right? That water is down there. It's just one of those like, so it's feeding the water table at the end of the day. I'm not gonna bother about little bitty drips that are actually more beneficial. In the way that I discovered that as a benefit to us, we get hard freezes in the winter. So for me, for the first couple years, that meant turn the water off, which sucks. I don't wanna turn the water off in the winter on the outside. This little drip right here has allowed me to keep the water running for the winter time, which is kind of cool, like to think about it that way. So, oh, no, let's go back in, Fluff. There we go. That's Fluff. That's Scott and Ashley's food. Well, Oak Creek organic feed, we love it, but it's seeds. You know, that's what's really cool about this is, I know there's pelletized chicken food, but to me it's like, that's only, anything that does one thing is not cool. It needs to be multifunctional for me to really vibe with it. I can let this chicken food splash on the ground, the ants carry some, the squirrel, it's all seeds. I know I hit on amaranth earlier, but that was the other thing is the chickens like it, right? If they eat it, I'm okay with it. Like I said, in the field, when they eat it and mow it down, it becomes, like I said, a profile where like, look at how many tops there are on this thing. And if they're gonna eat it, fine, cool, that's okay with me. I just have to make sure when I check it at certain boundaries, right? It's like, I don't want it to take over the property, so it involves a little handwork. We love our birds and they love us, I think. I mentioned a friend of ours, he emailed me and was like, you know, I've got this, and this year. And I'm like, cool, we didn't get any of those. And he's like, they're filling the void from peaches and pears. And I'm like, hey man, I've got a lot of peaches, a lot of peaches. We froze over 44 pounds of white peaches this year, which is amazing. That was with the pits removed and the skins. That's 45 pounds of peach halves, which is amazing. And then just based on my philosophies and principles, there's at least 45 on the ground, and probably we gave away another 20, I would bet. So that tree was absolutely hanging this year. We'll trade him some fruits. Like, hey man, I got peaches and maybe some pears. Pears were a little lower this year, but for pomegranates and olives and something else, he had a great year with some of the stuff that we just don't have or didn't have. So it's good. That's community, you know? We've changed a lot. And so that's the thing, is I could say nothing, but like you could point to anything and I can tell you how I've changed it. We put the vineyard in, I put this fence in, we remodeled the Airbnb. That was the first order of business, was getting that from a skeleton to like a nice place. The reed down on the creek was ginormously changed. We put in the garden, there was no garden. There's always something. We put in the air conditioning, right? There was no central air. Like little things like that, but it's stuff that's all kept me busy. Any of the Gabion work, the outdoor kitchen, it's been literally in build mode for 4 years, and now it's the time where we're like, we're good. We've got to like now stop. They say in permaculture, the first, I think, rule is observation, and like you should observe your property for a year before you even put a shovel to the ground. And like, that's not practical in most applications or situations, and especially when you're talking homesteading and you need to get your place starting to generate for you for various reasons or whatever. And so yeah, we've changed a lot. There's only a few places I look around and I'm like, yeah, I haven't touched that. When you don't have something, you learn how to either get by without or make it. Do what you can with what you have where you are. The birds are going pretty nicely in here right now. So we're calling this the berry bed, the goji berry, the blackberries, but what I'm pointing out right now is the arugula. Any of these little arugulas you see right here, these are volunteer, including right back here, all of these arugulas. Arugula is one of those ones, I call it like a zombie plant. We want plants that are like gonna reseed in the zombie apocalypse, ones that we want to eat, right? So arugula is a great one. You really, once you get a seed going, if you let it, you can't stop it. It's gonna take over. There's so many plants that are going to showcase what I'm saying and the whole idea of ecology versus economy. This took one seed, right? With all things going right. Like of course I planted a tray, and like there might have been some that didn't come in, but this is one seed to make this one plant, right? Crush open a berry. This is a tomato. I don't know how many seeds we've got in here. It's gonna be hard because they're sticky, but we'll say at least 10, I'm saying, probably. So, and these chia seeds. Seeds are abundant, right? And that's the whole point of what I'm getting at, is there's probably 10 seeds or so here. One seed made this plant, and you got, I don't know how many berries with how many seeds. I mean, do the math. And that's the same thing going on here with the sunflowers. The finch that was here just a moment ago picking at this one, you can see is pretty well picked out, and it just leaves this little puffy shell. But there's my point right there. They didn't get them all. And so I guarantee there's gonna be volunteer sunflowers next year. With my assistance, of course, too, because what am I doing? I'm chopping and dropping them in places that I want them to be. A lot of these were in the garden this year. You know, where you see all this mulch right here going basically all this way is just like the bare ground there, which I try really hard in the field to keep the soil covered regardless of what it is covering it. I don't care if it's Bermuda grass even in the field, that's good right now. But organic matter in the form mostly of mulch, but like then you get plants that, like this was cover crop and or some weeds that got a little out of control, too big to chop and drop, and so I placed them here. This is essentially going to be another garden at some point. I mean, it already is by certain standards. So I know this looks crazy, it's really dry, but now here's cardboard, right? That, like you hear that, that's cardboard. And if I move under the cardboard, this is dirt. It doesn't look like much, but for me to be able to do that right there is different than if I was able to do that over there. What little microorganisms are working on this, and add water to this, add a little water, a monsoon or whatever, things start coming alive. I did a dry corn patch here this year. It wasn't what I would fully call successful, but to me it's indicative of the process starting, of how you're, you know, whenever you have a patch of dirt that you're trying to make it a garden, you've got to invite life, right? And so that starts a lot of times with organic matter, like carbon, right? It is the source of all of it, the carbon. So put that on the ground, let the microorganisms start working on it. If it's something that you can put seeds on, start with cover crop, because that's really, to me, the best way to build soil, is getting that profile building underground and above ground. You're growing biomass, you chop that biomass, it becomes food and fodder for like microorganisms and other things like that. Essentially building the soil, and it doesn't always look pretty, right? Like But again, I'm not trying to manage everything, every single process. I'm letting processes be. The wind has run through these sunflowers like crazy, so I'm trying to push them back so they don't drop in the garden again. But I also want to prolong the process as long as possible. The birds are still harvesting, so I'm still inviting them to the garden. This is still a source of food and life for them. And so it's important to me to continue that as long as I can until it becomes a problem for our end too, right? And it's like, you gotta be honest with that process. If it's something that's hard for you, then how are you going to be the thing that maintains the thing next year? You have to engage, you have to play and understand like, okay, I am part of this. These wouldn't be here if I didn't allow them to be here. It's humbling sometimes to realize that you are beholden to a system that's bigger, and also you're the keeper of it in a way. What I was gonna try to show you again was this arugula plant. Arugula is one of my favorite. You can stay there. I'm gonna trudge through here real quick, because I know I've got one back here. Oh, here we go. I've got a bunch of them back here, but I'll take one. This is what I would actually call a small arugula plant. Every year I'll take the plants when they're like big like this, and I just throw them somewhere. Like in the case last year, I threw them over there, and they densely plant themselves. One of my favorite questions to ask little kids, like first grade gardens and stuff like that, was like, how many seeds did it take to make this one plant? And you'd get a bunch of little answers, right? Like, and then I'm like, how many seeds did it take to make this one plant? And then finally some kids like, one! And I'm like, yes, one! And then so we go and we take a pod, right? I mean, these again, like, to be fair, have been really stripped already. Like, it's been over there for months already dried out like this. So, it's not even gonna showcase exactly what I'm trying to show, but it is already. Like, look at each of these pods. It took one seed to make a pod. And again, this is I've seen way better examples. Like if you leave, like that one, if I leave it to be a seed plant, it's gonna be twice this size. This was just crowded in with other plants, and so that's what you get. For instance, yeah, I want arugula right there, right? I'll let it, and I'll walk on it. It's gonna break the seeds and disperse them, but, so here's one pod from one of the branches that we'll say eat say 10 branches on there, 10 pods per branch, maybe. That's like low numbers, but I'd say we're pushing almost 20 seeds there. Someone could count it if they really want, but that's what I'm saying. For some reason, our culture, mother culture, and I'm not saying humans, because there are tribes out there still living that are not drinking our Kool-Aid. They're still very much plugged in with the natural cycle. They're still very much part of it, big and small. Our culture, ranging the entire globe, has created this idea of scarcity when it comes to food and security. And it's like, I've never been had by it for some reason. I've not, you know, it took me a long time to articulate it, but I've always kind of been like, the gig's up. You can't convince me. And for some reason, and maybe it's because when I was a little kid, you'd find me in the dirt, in the forest, playing, I don't know, but you can't convince me that the birds are gonna have enough food and I'm not. Or that it's what we do is so crazy to me, how we look at certain food plants and then the others are not. Nature's not scarce. Nature is incredibly abundant. It is our own design that has created scarcity, or the illusion of scarcity, because frankly, it's not. I think our species is one of the only things that has the level of attachment that we see to ideas. You know, with ideas, it's easy to get stuck in that eddy. You know, we talk about the flow of the river and how it goes by until it hits a boulder. Like, here's your idea, you're flowing, and all of a sudden something happens. And if you get stuck on that happening, you're gonna be stuck right behind that eddy, just spinning around while life passes you by. And it's, you know, that's how sticky attachments can be. And the river has taught you, let it flow. Let it flow, because it can be hard. You have an idea, you work on it so hard, and it just blows up in your face. Or Murphy's relentless. I could tell you about Murphy plenty, and it's just one of those, you have to keep getting up, and the intention is always there, but the attachment has to be loose. This pine tree, it's interesting that it's there. And it's funny that it's such a driving force in the garden, because they're conifers, and so they support a different microorganism in the ground, right? A pine forest is more likely to support a fungal soil mass. It's not likely to have as many worms in it. Woody stems generally prefer a more fungally dominant soil. It affects the breakdown process, and it leads to a more acidic soil. Things with greens are gonna generally support a more bacterially dominant soil. It's simplistic. It's like, you can think of it like that pile of straw over there. You got baby food or steak. Ultimately, you're always gonna have both, but it's like I said, dominance. And so it's funny to have a pine tree right next to a garden that would essentially be very alkalizing native soil, that thing's working to acidify the soil. I'm sure if you've ever hiked a pine forest, that duff layer is allowed to build up and just build up, and you can, dig a pine tree underneath for, a foot or so before finding the soil sometimes. But what you won't find are earthworms or roly-polies. You're not gonna find arthropods. You're not gonna find macrobiology in that regard, breaking it down. It's definitely the microorganisms. And that's something I didn't realize a long time ago. There's no one good, right? What's good for this isn't necessarily good for that. And so on that note, worms, on a non-dry day, if we had just gotten rain, you will see worm castings everywhere on this soil, everywhere on this whole property. It's insane what they do. These mulberry, when they drop leaves, there won't be a single leaf left months after they're all done. It's like the worms eat it all. They're aggressive processors of organic matter. The worms are the big driver for us in the garden space. Sometime in 2021, I believe it was like February of 21, I was on Instagram looking at some like regenerative pages for indoor gardens, and I came across Avocado Tech. Blue of Green Tank is his handle. Shout out to Tyler, super cool dude. I'm really happy that he helped me get on my journey where I'm at. I was like, I'm looking at these pages, and all of a sudden it's like, you're looking at someone's indoor grow bed, and they flip over an avocado, and there's like 100 worms, just like, whoa, what is going on there? And I already know in my mind, worms are like it, in a sense. Like they are in an applicable growing situation. Their castings are incredibly nutrient dense. They have a ton of calcium. The worm casting is incredible. What comes out is not what came in. It is a supercharged form. And of course, what went in matters what comes out. So I'm not gonna say like, it's not Rumpelstiltskin here, but yes, in a sense, what they are doing is incredible upcycling. So I'm like, whoa, what is going on, man? You have worms in your indoor bed? Like, tell me more. He's like, well, if I had to do it again, I would reach out and I would do it like Leighton Morrison's Soil Horizon system. And I was like, okay, cool. So it sent me down another rabbit hole, and check this out. I've been studying soil formation for over a decade. The part that we're focusing on here, EAO, these horizons. When you talk about soil layers, they're called horizons. The horizon that most people focus on, like a potted plant or whatever, is this O horizon, right? That's your organic matter. I don't even know if that's actually what it stands for, because the others have no like real acronyms. That's alluvial layer, but who knows what A stands for? Just a horizon. People focus on that O horizon, right? Like if you were to say, make this a garden bed, people would fill it with potting soil or compost or something alike, right? Like it would just be like this rich, fluffy stuff. But in my gardens, everything you see in here, including pots that I've done it in pots this small, like little 1 gallon pots. Just like on the creek, you notice rocks, right? Bedrock. That really is what we call parent material. And this is a more typical soil profile of somewhere like the Midwest, where you've got really deep soil profiles and stuff like that. You get to a bedrock layer, or what they call parent material. But in this instance, this represents like gravel. It's being broken down in a way, but it's gravel and sand. So in all of the beds in here, so this bed, this 4 foot by 12 foot bed, this one bed here, all of these pots, those pots, everything in here starts with horizons. It goes in a ratio too, so before I get too carried away, when you're setting up these beds, the ratio goes 1 to 4. So one would be your E, 2 your A, and 4 your O when you're setting it up. So the E is coarse gravel and coarse sand, colorful as you can. So always diversity, right? Sand and gravel, and you just kind of put them together. It's not more complex than that. The A is where it's a little complex, and this is what makes this whole system work. The A has to have clay. You gotta have clay in the A. The A horizon is that mineral, right? Like these are obviously minerals, and microorganisms will break them down after time, but much more like weather and things like that are usually what's gonna break them down in nature. But this is what we would otherwise call our native soil. It's got the sand, silt, and clay. Like that is what, again, soil scientists classify soil as different levels of sand, silt, clay. And like, so we're starting to learn like, okay, there's biology involved, what does that do? But the sand, silt, and clay in here is what makes it go. Surface area generally in agricultural clays is negatively charged, which like a magnet. Negatively charged things is attracting positively charged things like calcium, nitrogen, all the cations that we have in the soil, the food, sodium particle, whatever that cation is that the plant needs at the time, it helps it to hold on to the soil without being leached away from water, right? It like helps hold it into the soil rhizosphere until something can work on it. And so clay is really important in that regard alone, that it's the magnet of the soil chemistry. That's the A. It's incredibly important. And then the O, we're getting to what most people put in their soils, right? Potting soils and things like that. If we're doing inside plants or like house plants, occasionally we'll buy a bag of potting soil, organic potting soil. But if and when I buy a bag of potting soil, I'm gonna tell everybody this, just because again, I think we do things sometimes not knowing, and we just have to just go down that path. Peat moss is in nearly every bag of potting soil everywhere on the planet. And I'm not gonna go on a huge campaign here, but like, we should stop harvesting peat. We should stop buying bags of soil that have peat in it. There are other bags out there, pit moss, pit moss. I love pit moss. We've done so much work with pit moss. What that is essentially recycled cardboard, paper, and bark that is inert like peat moss is. It's a replaceable, replenishable. It's at least a step toward the right way, like of getting people thinking like, these peat bogs took millions of years to form. They're a water filtration system, they're a carbon sequestration system, we cannot replace it in our lifetime. We should stop doing things like that, for instance, right? That's not me saying like, stop doing that. Like, I've used plenty of bags with peat in it before I knew better. Once I figured it out, this is really bad. And there's also people out here trying to help us shortcome these gaps. Let's support them. So in Arizona Worm Farm, I don't know if you got down there, they were a source for me to buy my initial peat moss or pit moss. I got it through them initially, and then I started working with pit moss. But I used to not have any perlite in this bed at all, right? This was just like organic matter that I built up. I'm not saying perlite's bad or that it's bad for your soil. Like, if you have a bag of potting soil, use it, but use it over and over and over and over. Don't ever throw it away. It doesn't become bad. Like, let's use that peat to its fullest extent now that we've got it. So these beds are full of like I said, 1, 2, 4 when I started. So when I started, they were absolutely full with the organic matter to the top. I have not, these are sweet potato vines. And this is an avocado from when I was doing my avocado tech, but I haven't amended these. The soil breaking down and doing its thing. And like, so if you look at all of this is worm castings. The entire thing is worm castings. And I try not to dig in here too much because I'm gonna find worms and roots like that. And like, I understand, like, even right here, there's millions of microorganisms in my hand right now, millions, and not even, there's possibly hundreds of different kinds, if not thousands of different kinds. Like, that's how much life is in soil that it just goes unthought of a lot of times. I don't use fertilizer, right? I don't do any of that stuff. What I'm constantly doing is, this is some natural breakdown process in varying stages, and that is the food for the things that are living in this bed that are creating the microorganisms, right? Like, who's feeding the cottonwood tree down by the creek? Who's tilling that soil? Who's checking the pH? Who's doing all that? Nobody's doing all that. And so how are you going to tell me that to grow something smaller with less demand, I have to do all that? It's ridiculous to think about. It's preposterous. So I'm constantly proving, to me, I'm constantly validating that nature does have a design. We are a part of it. We can integrate, and it is fully supporting what we do. Everything in here, again, when I set this bed up, the bottom of this was just coarse gravel and coarse sand, right? Like the hole probably to right here. Then I put my native soil to here, and then I filled up the last. So this was full all the way to the top of the potting soil when it started. But if you look at it now, I'm all the way down here, right? And like, I mean, we have to move through the strawberries and the oat straw from earlier, like lots of stuff. But look at that, roly-poly's going crazy right there. And then all this right here, that's worm castings, all of this. So it's like, why even add worm castings? Why would I add worm castings? Why would I create an infrastructure? I don't need to, right? Just put the elements in place and let the systems do what they're supposed to do. So yeah, these little worms, I don't want to be mean to the little worm, but that's the guy right there, one of them. This is likely a red wiggler. There's possibly others in here, but red wigglers are a type of earthworm. Earthworms, that's like the general category of worms in general that we like. There's, I think, over 7,000 species of worm or whatever, but earthworms in general, so night crawlers, red wigglers, those are all earthworms, but they're different. And so in this bed that is open to the bottom of the ground, right? Like it's open, the worms can come and go if they really wanted. Red wigglers, what they do, or any of those composting worms, they stay on the surface. They might go a couple inches down, but I haven't even ever seen them that deep. They're surface litter worms. And so they're constantly going to be just working on and breaking down that organic matter, but they're also eating the microorganisms in the soil that have been breaking down that organic matter. Once they poop them out, it's like ripping open a bag of fertilizer. That's the other teeming with microbes says that, and I love that analogy as well. But it's like, so now it's plant available because here's this dead microbe that had already taken and worked and made the nitrogen available and things like that. The cycle goes on. In this bed, so not this bed right here where it's closed bottom, I would not put an earthworm, a night crawler, because they want to go 10, 12 feet down sometimes, right? It's not fair to put them in something that's not even 18 inches deep. So this one, do I have night crawlers in it? I might have put some in and like they may or may not come and go, but primarily what I'm working on in here is the red wigglers. They're breaking down the organic matter, and again, they're upcycling it, right? I'm very pro diversity. So like I have stuff where like, I know I had thrips working on these leaves earlier. I've had whiteflies, I've had spider mites before. If you can find something to eat your problem, that's usually a better way to go. But I just invite things like regular spiders, like orb spider, like spiders, not spider mites. These guys, they're all in here working. Like not many flying insects work in this garden when you have a ton of spiders. So they help keep my pest control to a minimum. If I don't have to measure pH, if I don't have to fertilize, what I'm constantly doing is undoing all the stuff that people do. And so it's not a bragging point for me. What it is a bragging point on the abundance and the inherent ability of nature if we show up with it in tandem or in symbiosis rather than like fighting it. The cottonwood is gonna grow forever and ever the way it grows. Like all we need to do is biomimicry. That's what it all comes back to me. That word right there, biomimicry. People say I'm regenerative, people say I'm this and that or what. I don't even know what that means, man. I like buzzwords like the next guy, but really it's biomimicry. It's mimicking natural cycles and systems and integrating them into your managed cultivation system. Independence is another illusion that we've created. There's not a single microorganism, there's not a single thing living independently of other things. That's just not. So it's silly to behave that way in a human culture. Reach out to people that are doing things that are inspiring you to ask for help. You don't have to have a raised bed. You don't have to have all these fancy things, or I mean, not that any of this is fancy, but the system works in that way. And again, the only reason I'm doing this and the reason this shirt exists, I have soil properties books, ecology books, biology books. I can tell you this is how soil forms. It's called fall. You know, when every year in a place that we have fall, right? Arizona's a weird, like sometimes, depending, those leaves fall on the ground. And that process is started when something, right? Like the photosynthesis, it's everything is green right now. But when it starts to translocate those sugars, right? When it's taking all that energy that it sent up from the ground into those leaves, and now it's taking them back into its root system and putting them into the microorganisms for food for the winter and dropping that on the ground like a blanket, it's huge. It's everything. And when we undo any of that, like we joked about this, Midwest guys, we grew up raking the leaves and putting them in those bags from Ace that we had to buy, and they'd probably tear and like made awesome leaf piles to jump in. That was fun. But then we'd have to aerate the yard and pay for the fertilizer. And it's like, it's so silly to me when we literally, you know, zooming back out from my childhood, like hashtag leave the leaves. That's it. That's the answer. Leave the leaves. Let the whole process do what it was always going to do. And, you know, sit in your hammock instead. I don't know. Like, I just love being a part of a process that is all about abundance. It's absolutely got my back. It's got your back. It's got anybody that wants to show up to do this. And it starts however you want. Like, again, you know, start with a pot. My very first gardens with my, you know, now 16-year-old, 15-year-old, but soon to 16, might as well be, was recycled wood. I was walking around downtown Phoenix, pulling him in his wagon. There were some random 2x4s lying around, and I saw it as an opportunity to build a little raised bed. It was like a 6-inch by 2-foot raised bed on my balcony in downtown Phoenix. So just do it. Whatever you have to do, if you're inspired to it, you know, start with a pot, whatever, get something in your life, because growing is addictive, and it's the addiction we need. This is just a cowpea cover crop plant. Just look, it's hanging with beans, and each of these beans, here you go, here's one that's almost done, so I'm not too upset with it, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in just this one pod. That's what I'm trying to plug into, is how do we get to be a part of this system where it's like, again, one seed. You have any idea how many seeds are gonna come from this one seed? Insane. And this is a volunteer also, by the way. So a lot of the plants in here, we've let reseed and volunteer, and that is my favorite type of garden. And certain plants like these tomatoes, right, of course I'm cultivating, but my heart tells me one year I'll have volunteer cherry tomatoes in the field, right? I just have to build the soil hierarchy, build the presence of everything that I'm trying to get in the garden to that space. Observation's the key to all of it, but I can't just sit around for 4 years observing. That's just not feasible, right? People ask me all the time how to blah, 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 right? And the thing is, if you know what it is you want, or what it is, and the why, those are the only things you need to know. How is a inhibitory question that for some reason we always put at the front end of something. It's like, how do we garden? What do you want to grow and why? If you know those things, if you know the what and the why, the how becomes part of the story. It is no longer an inhibiting question, and I'm just gonna say that about everything. The power in that is if you're able to learn from your own observations so that you can make adaptations. But if all you're ever doing is just going along at head speed and doing whatever, you're gonna get in your own way. You're not gonna see things like the finch because this ugly bed was done a long time ago, let's get rid of it and put them in the compost. Like, you know, to each their own, that's fine. But to me, my favorite workshops are seed saving workshops. There's no other way to show abundance. It just is amazing. It's astounding to me. So again, like tomatoes, you get a plant that has a bunch of tomatoes on it, crush them open, seeds, right? It's like, you guys, my whole thing is I want to show you 5 different ways to grow lettuce. There's not one way to grow lettuce. I'll show you the ways I build all of my beds, but I want lettuce growing all out there, just reseeding on its own. Most of my favorite plants should be aggressively reseeding on their own. The idea that we have to do so much in our garden is just, it's silly to me. That's the other thing, is I try to show people what I don't do. You know, it's like I let systems take over, and sometimes it's pretty, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's more abundant in ways than the ways that you don't want, and less in ways that you do, and things like that. But it's all part of it, and really there's no bad plants. Like I said, it's all biomass at the end of the day.
All these Cosmos just came up from volunteers from last year. We didn't plant any Cosmo seeds this year. Flowers brings me so much joy. So this seems to be the area where I find myself doing the most research and finding cool seed purveyors and different varieties of seeds. But Cosmos seem to do really well here, and they're so happy. And these were all reseeded from last year. These are our carrots that bolted. I think they just look so lacy, like they almost look like a Queen Anne's lace, and they smell amazing. So I'm always cutting and throwing these. We grow a certain amount of carrots every year that we want to bolt, because I just love the way that they create their flowers. And they see it in a vase and say, what flower is that? I'm like, it's a carrot.
If you want a typical vegetable garden that you'd like to then acclimate to your area, you start by saving seeds. Plants are outbreeding, right? And so like if you want to save seeds from amaranth, I wouldn't just take this one. I would take a few that have, you know, had that ability to cross, and you start building a robust population that way. Acclimating a seed to your environment, saving that seed, planting is gold, pure gold. If we were to count the species in this bed, let's just say here's some green onions, which you can plant green onions from seed. I came and got a lot of the flower tops off of these just to throw elsewhere and have green onions growing wherever, right? Because that's cool, why not? But these are usually from a bunch. Like if you buy a bunch of green onions and you usually just use the onion part, and like a lot of people hopefully don't throw it away, but will throw that bottom part away. And literally if you put it in a glass of water, you can within an hour see it growing again. It's just amazing. We tried to do baby corn this year. You're supposed to harvest this, I guess, 5 days after the silks appear. And I didn't read that. I was like, oh, I waited till about 11 days, huh? And I don't know what variety necessarily everything is because I've taken to just plant the seeds. Just plant the seeds. And we do try to plant with the moon cycle, as weird as that sounds. Like, put the seed in the ground. Just get it in the ground, get that thing going. So like sometimes I'll prioritize putting a seed in the ground when I have other work to do, because now I'm like, okay, well, at least while I'm doing this work, this is doing its work too. So these tomatoes, they'll probably do a nice little crop right before they go, like, we hit a hard freeze. It's gonna be funny, but that's just how I've noticed things go around here. It took a little while from growing in Phoenix for 10 years to adapting to like an honest one cycle thing. We got like everything, moringas up in here, little kales, like it's just, you just put stuff places and see what does well and like adapt. We've already got this rosemary here. There's some sage tucked in the corner there. These onions are more or less, they're perennial the way we treat them. This is a lemon or a lime basil that actually volunteered right over here. We had like let some basil reseed itself and I found it. It was in the path, so it was a weed. And I'm like, oh, come here, little buddy. And it's loving it right here, obviously. So, and it smells so good.
Yeah, it does.
But I'm thinking this could be a good perennial herb bed. But you know, it's just things sometimes we move hastily and we try not to because it always comes with thought. But other times we're like, yeah, let's, like I said, we're learning to slow down a lot and really just the what and the why, you know? Because you can make big mistakes pretty quickly that are hard to recover if if you're not thoughtful about it.
Hold on. Here's our happy place. There's something so healing about just listening to the water. This is a nice, pretty color. Put that in a vase.
Johnson grass. Love listening to the sound of the water for sure. This is an interesting area because the water's moving fast, but this right here is a cattail. It's what's known as a macrophyte, meaning it's a large plant in a slow moving water. So even though we're actually right next to fast moving water, when you see things like duckweed or algae, cattails, there's a few like indicator plants of slow moving water. One of the things that I love about Oak Creek is the vast diversity within short geographical areas. From right here, example, even to 100 feet up. It's just like, it's different. And it's just really cool to see that, whether you're talking about the geography, like the rocks, or the flora or the fauna. I think we're a part of it in a sense. Like we harvest the mint for teas and that mix for the composting toilet.
We have horsetail, which is medicinal, but it's also sectioned. And they fit inside of each other, and it's like a straw. You know, ancient cultures use it as a straw, and it fits like Lincoln logs. So to come down here and pick the horsetail and have kids put it together in groups of 10, engaging all of the senses, I think, is something that we all can do more. I mean, now like we're listening to the cicadas. There are times down here when we have to shout to talk because the cicadas are so loud.
I love the diversity. I don't know every single plant down here. Predominantly the grasses I know less, but look, check the minnows. Because of the flood times, a snow melt will create a reset in the creek. It creates a flash flood that offsets so much biology. It's just funny because we see annual cycles going on within a perennial stream bed. I don't know, it's just interesting to witness things like that, where you learn a lot when you are in a space like this. And I mean, there's plenty of really cool places on Oak Creek to just go and picnic and venture, and we love them all. This is growing wild here. It's cool. It's not like the celery that we stick peanut butter in, but it is celery all day. It's just really cool when food grows around you just naturally too. And of course there's other stuff you can eat. These are 3 foods we recognize and sometimes buy. This is Mentha arvensis, so that's the Latin binomial. It is field mint. My herbalist teacher says it's one of the only true mint. I do water testing with Friends of the Verde, and so I'll go to different stream bed pockets, and just 10 minutes up the stream, like that hillside that you see up there, if you were to go down to the bottom of it, the stream, just in that area is the same species of mint, but has taken on different morphogenic properties. It smells more like spearmint, and this one more like peppermint. The diversity within just short stretches of the creek is to me always astounding. It never gets old on a river. What brings me joy is purpose, is plugging in and uncovering that, because I think we conceal that so much with things. The joy of nature is fine, but if I was just my hermit self being in the mountain, that's not it. Happiness is meant to be shared. All of this wouldn't matter at all if I couldn't share it. And for right now, that means sharing it with guests or with event people, with my family. So it's sharing, frankly, it's sharing.